Good wishes to all of you. India's ancient past. Final chapter of this book was chapter 33, Legacy in Science and Civilization audiobook. Religion. Man's confrontation with the nature gave rise to significant developments. People had to overcome the difficulties created by the jungles, hills, hard soils, droughts, floods, animals, etc. too, and their livelihood. In this process, they developed technology and the scientific outlook. They began undertaking agriculture in the 7th millennium BC, but they were not able to effectively counter such natural hazards as fire, flood, and famine. They found these hazards insurmountable and inexplicable. On the other hand, people took advantage of the fertility of the soil, timely rain, and similar other gifts of nature. Therefore, both the bounty advanced by nature and the scarcity caused by it led them to think of religion and supernatural forces. Brahmanism or Hinduism developed as the dominant religion in early India and influenced the development of art, literature, and society as a whole. In addition to Brahmanism, India gave rise to Jainism and Buddhism. Although Christianity came here in about the first century Anno Domini, it did not make much headway in ancient times. Buddhism also disappeared from India in the course of time, though it had spread as far as Japan in the east and as far as Central Asia in the northwest. In the process of diffusion, Buddhism projected a great deal of Indian art, language, and literature in neighboring countries. Jainism continued in India and helped the development of its art and literature. To this day, it has a substantial number of adherents, especially amongst the trading communities in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Karnataka. The Varna system. Religion had a peculiar influence on the formation of social classes in India. In other ancient societies, the duties and functions of social classes were fixed by law, which was largely enforced by the state. In India, however, Varna laws enjoyed the sanction of both the state and religion. The functions of priests, warriors, peasants, and laborers were defined in law and were supposed to have been set out by divine agencies. Those who departed from their functions and were found guilty of offenses were subjected to secular punishments. They had also to perform rituals and penances according to their varna. Each varna was given not only social but also realistic recognition. In the course of time, varnas or social classes and jatis or castes were made hereditary by law and religion. All this was done to ensure the Vaishyas produced and paid taxes and Shudras served as laborers to enable Brahmanas to act as priests and Kshatriyas as rulers. Based on a division of labor and specialization of occupations, the specular institutions, the caste or Varna systems certainly helped the growth of society and economy at the initial stage and contributed to the development of the state. The producing and laboring classes were disarmed, and gradually each caste was so pitted against the other that those that were oppressed could not combine against the privileged orders. The need to carry out their respective functions was so strongly ingrained in the minds of the various classes that ordinarily they would never think of deviating from their dharma. The Bhagavad Gita taught that people should lay down their lives in defense of their own dharma rather than adopt the dharma of others, which would prove dangerous. The lower orders worked hard in the firm belief that they would deserve a better life in the next world or birth. This belief lessened the intensity and frequency of tensions and conflicts between those who actually produced and those who live off these producers as princes, priests, officials, soldiers, and big merchants. Hence, the necessity to coerce the lower orders was not very strong in ancient India. What was done by slaves and other producing sections in Greece and Rome under the threat of the ruler's whip was done by the Vaishyas and Shudras out of a conviction formed through Brahmanical indoctrination and the Varna system. Philosophical systems. The Indian thinkers viewed the world as an illusion and deliberated deeply on the relation between the soul and God. Indeed, philosophers of no other country delved so deeply into this problem as did the Indians. Ancient India is considered famous for its contribution to philosophy and spiritualism, but the Indians also developed a materialistic view of the world. In the sixth system of philosophy that Indians created, we find elements of materialistic philosophy in the Samkhya system of Kapila, who was born around 580 BC. He believed that the soul can attain liberation only through real knowledge, which can be acquired through perception, inference, and hearing. The Samkhya system does not recognize the existence of God. According to it, the world has been created not by God but by nature, and the world and human life are regulated by natural forces. The development of logic may have helped the Samkhya system. Prior to the 5th century, logic was not a well established discipline. The Nyaya Sutra seems to have been compiled around Anatomy 400. It mentions four proofs or pramanas comprising perception, inference, comparison, and testimony. We find detailed discussion regarding valid and invalid knowledge, and aspects of each kind of proof are treated in detail. Although debating devices were used in theological disputes, they could not have been developed in isolation from other disputes, including land disputes. Materialistic philosophy received the greatest impetus from Charvaka, who lived in about the 6th century BC. The philosophy that he propounded is known as Lokayata. He argued that what is not experienced by man through his sensory organs does not really exist, which implies that gods do not exist. However, with the decline in trade, handicrafts, and urbanism, the idealistic system of philosophy came to the fore. The idealistic system taught that the world is an illusion. People were asked by the Upanishads to abandon the world and to strive for real knowledge. Western thinkers have taken to the teachings of the Upanishads because they are unable to solve the human problems created by modern technology. The famous German philosopher Schopenhauer found in his philosophy a place for the Vedas and the Upanishads. He used it to say that the Upanishads consoled him in his life and would also console him after death. Crafts and technology. It would be wrong to think that Indians did not contribute to material culture. The first great contribution was made by the Harappan culture during the Bronze Age culture. It covered an area larger than that of Egypt or of Mesopotamia. It produced the largest number of fired bricks and the best form of town planning. There is no doubt that crafts, commerce, and agriculture made great strides and supported numerous cities. In ancient times, Indians attained proficiency in several fields of production. Indian craftsmen developed great expertise in dyeing and creating various kinds of colors. The basic colors made in India were so lustrous and lasting that the wonderful paintings of Ajanta are still intact. Similarly, Indians developed great expertise in the art of making steel. This craft was first developed in India in 200 BC, and Indian steel was exported to many countries of the world from very early times and came to be called wood in later times. No other country in the world could match the steel swords made by Indian craftsmen, and these were in great demand in the entire region from Asia to Eastern Europe. Polity. The Arthashastra of Kautilya leaves no doubt that Indians could run the administration of a large empire and tackle the problems of a complex society. India produced a great ruler in Ashoka who, in spite of his victory over Kalinga, adopted a policy of peace and non aggression. Ashoka and several other Indian kings, practiced religious tolerance and stressed that the wishes of the followers of other religions should be respected. Also, besides Greece, India was the only other country to experiment with some form of democracy. Science and mathematics. India made an important contribution to science in ancient times. Religion and science were inextricably, inextricably linked. Astronomy made great strides in India because the planets began to be regarded as gods and their movements began to be closely observed. Their study became essential because of their connecting to changes in the seasons and weather conditions which were important for agricultural activities. The science of grammar and linguistic arose because the ancient Brahmanas stressed that every Vedic prayer and mantra should be recited with meticulous precision. In fact, the first result of the scientific outlook of Indians was the development of Sanskrit grammar in the 5th century BC. Panini systematized the rules governing Sanskrit and produced a grammar called Ashtadhyayi. By the 3rd century BC, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine began to develop separately. In the field of mathematics, the ancient Indians made three distinct contributions: the notation system, the decimal system, and the use of zero. The earliest epigraphic evidence for the use of the decimal system is in the beginning of the 5th century Anno Domini. The Indian notational system was adopted by the Arabs who spread it in the Western world. The Indians' numerals are called Arabic in English, but the Arabs themselves called their numerals hints. And before they were adopted in the West, they had been used in India for centuries. They are to be found in the inscriptions of Ashoka, which were inscribed in the 3rd century BC. Indians were the first to use the decimal system. Aryabhatta, under Domini 476 to 500, was acquainted with it. The Chinese learned this system from the Buddhist missionaries, and the Western world borrowed it from the Arabs when the later came into contact with India. The zero was discovered by Indians in about the 2nd century BC. Indian mathematicians considered zero as a separate numeral, and it was used in this sense in sums of arithmetic. In Arabia, the earliest use of zero was in Anno Domini 873. The Arabs learned and adopted it from Indian and spread it in Europe. Although both Indians and Greeks contributed to algebra, in Western Europe its knowledge was acquired not from Greece but from the Arabs who had acquired it from India. The bricks constructions of Harappa shows that in northwestern India, people had a substantial knowledge of measurement and geometry. Eventually, the Vedic people may have benefited from this knowledge, which appears in the Salva Sutras of about the 5th century BC. In the 2nd century BC, Apastamba produced a practical geometry for the construction of altars at which the kings could offer sacrifices. If it describes the acute angle, obtuse angle, and right angle. Aryabhatta formulated the method for calculating the area of a triangle, which led to the origin of trigonometry. The most famous work of this time is Surya Siddhanta, and no comparable work is to be found in the contemporary ancient India. The most renowned scholars of astronomy were Aryabhatta and Varahamihira. Aryabhatta lived in the 5th century and Varahamihira in the 6th. Aryabhatta calculated the position of the planets in accordance with the Babylonian method. He discovered the cause of lunar and solar eclipse, the circumference of the earth, which he measured on the basis of speculation, is even today considered to be correct. He pointed out that the sun is stationary and the earth rotates. Aryabhatta's work is entitled Aryabhatiya, was a landmark in the development of mathematical and astronomical knowledge, and is a distinct contribution to trigonometry. On the basis of it, all the shapes and sizes of plots involved in gift making and property partition could be measured and assessed for fixation of rent or tax in early medieval times. This knowledge could also be used for the various measurements needed for the erection of temples and palaces and other engineering work. The use of the zero and the decimal system finds a place in the Aryabhatiya, but it was not put to any significant use in India. Once it spread westward through the Arabs, it began to be used for bookkeeping by Italian traders in the 10th century. India's loss in trade between the 6th and the 10th centuries can perhaps be linked to the neg- neglect of the zero and decimal system. More accurate knowledge relevant to measurement and also to agroastronomical calculations was made available by the algebra developed by Brahmagupta during the first half of the 7th century. Varahamihira's well-known work Brihat Samhita Brihat Samhita was written in the 6th century. He started that the moon rotates around the earth and the earth rotates around the sun. He utilized several Greek works to explain the movement of the planets and some other astronomical problems. Although Greek knowledge influenced Indian astronomy, Indians doubtless pursued the subject further and made use of it in their observations of the planets. Varahamihira's plant and animal classifications enriched agricultural knowledge. Although his predictions relate to numerous social matters, the instructions given by him regarding the selection of its sites for building houses tie up with the founding of new villages. Similarly, Varahamihira's observations on the seasons and the weather could have been useful in planning the agricultural calendar. He emphasized that the calendar should be constantly updated to keep pace with the change in the seasons. Varahamihira acted as a kind of astronomer cum astrologer. The office of a Jyotish began in early medieval times. As is indicated in many land charters in the rural areas, the priest Jyotish became an integral part of the Jagmani system. In the applied field, Indian craftsmen contributed much to the development of chemistry. Indian dyers invented lasting colors and they also discovered the blue color. We may recall that India smiths were the first in the world to manufacture steels. Medicine. The ancient Indian physicians studied anatomy. They devised methods to diagnose diseases and prescribed medicines for their cure. The earliest mentions of medicines is to be found in the Atharva Veda, but as in other ancient societies, the remedies recommended were replete with magical charms and spells, and medicine was not developed along scientific lines. In the 2nd century Anno Domini, India produced two famous scholars of Ayurveda, Shushruta and Charaka. In the Shushruta Samhita, Shushruta describes the method of operating cataract, stone disease, and several other ailments. He mentions as many as 121 implements to be used for surgery. In the treatment of disease, he lays special stress on diet and cleanliness. Charaka's Charaka Samhita is like an encyclopedia of Indian medicine. It describes various types of fever, leprosy, hysteria, mirghi, and tuberculosis. Possibly Charaka was not aware that some of these are infections. His book contains the names of a large number of plants and herbs that could be used as medicines. The book is thus useful not only for the study of Indian medicine but also for that of ancient India flora and chemistry. In subsequent centuries, Indian medicine developed on the lines set out by Charaka. Geography. Ancient Indians also made some contributions to the study of geography. They had little knowledge of the geography of the lands outside India, but the rivers, mountain ranges, places of pilgrimage, and different regions of the country are described in the epics and Puranas. Although Indians were acquainted with China and Western countries, they neither had any clear idea of their location nor of their distances from India. In early times, Indians obtained some knowledge of navigation and contributed to the crafts of shipbuilding. However, as the important political powers had their seats of power far away from the coast and faced no threat from the sea, the ancient Indian princes did not pay any particular attention to navigation. Art and literature. The ancient Indian masons and craftsmen produced wonderful works of art starting from Harappan times. In the historical period, the monolithic pillars erected by Ashoka are famous for their gloss and polish, which may which match the gloss on northern black polished ware. It is still a mystery how the craftsmen were able to achieve this kind of polish on pillars and pottery. The Maurya polished pillars were mounted on statues of animals, especially lions. The lion capital has been adopted as the national emblem of the Republic of India. We may also refer to the cave temples of Ajantas as well as the famous Ajanta paintings, which go back to the beginning of the Christian era. In a way, Ajanta is the birthplace of Asian art and has many as 30 cave temples constructed between the 2nd century BC and the 7th century Anno Domini. The paintings started in the 2nd century Anno Domini and most of them relate to the Gupta period. Their themes were borrowed from stories about previous incarnations of the Buddha and from other ancient literature. The achievements of the Indian painters of Ajanta has been justly and greatly lauded by all art connoisseurs. The lines and colors used at Ajanta display a proficiency that was unmatched in the world until the Renaissance in Europe. Indian art, moreover, was not limited to India but spread to Central Asia and China at one end and to Southeast Asia on the other. The focal point of the spread of Indian art into Afghanistan and the neighboring parts of Central Asia was Gandhara. Elements of Indian art were fused with those of Central Asian and Hellenistic art, giving rise to a new art style called the Gandhara style. The first statue of the Buddha was fashioned in this style, although its features are Indian, and size and the presentation of the head and the drapery show Greek influence. Similarly, the temples constructed in South India served in some ways as models for the construction of temples in Southeast Asia. We may recall the temple at Angkor Wat in Cambodia and the temple at Borobudur in Java. In the field of education, writing was first undertaken in the mid that mid 3rd millennium BC in the Harappan culture. Though this script has not so far been differed, in historical times we find provisions for higher education in the huge monastic establishment of Nalanda, which attracted students not only for different parts of India but also from Tibet and China. The standards of examination were stiff, and only those who could pass the test prescribed by the Dwara Pandita or the scholar at the gate could be admitted to the university. Nalanda is one of the earliest examples of a residential come teaching institutions which housed thousands of monks devoted to learning, philosophy, and meditation. In the field of literature, the Indians produced the Rigveda, which is the earliest specimen of the Indo Aryan languages and literature. And on its basis, an attempt has been made to determine the nature of the Aryan culture. In Gupta times, Kalidasa wrote his fine works, and his play Abhijnana Sakuntalam has been translated into all the important languages of the world. Strength and weakness. It is difficult to sum up the achievements of ancient India. Those of the Harappan culture and are staggering, and Harappan objects are displayed in the museums of India and Pakistan. Though the contemporary Mesopotamian antiquities were largely lost or destroyed in the Second Gulf War. In post Harappan times, people contributed to various fields of science and civilization. However, the caste system based on the Brahmanical ideology persists to this day. In ancient times, the Shudras, including the Untouchables, were convinced of their inborn inferiority, and this was the case too with women who were considered items of property. Even sorry, even now, these relics have not completely disappeared. Similarly, the common people continue to suffer from loss of land. The Shatavahana started the practice of land grants with administrative rights in the 2nd century. Later, rulers widely followed this practice with the caused an equal distribution of land and the impoverishment of the cultivators. The people were required to respect the rights of the landlords, and it was decreed that the opponents of land grants would be punished. This appeared sharp inequalities in important fields, although some ancient texts looked upon the world as a family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, this ideal would not make any impact. At the end of the chapter Chronology, we see 6th century Charvakas Lokayata or materialistic philosophy. 580 Birth of Kapila, the founder of the Samkhya system. 5th century the Salva Sutras set out the knowledge of measurement and geometry. Panini systematized their rules governing Sanskrit and composed Ashtadhyayi. 3rd century independent development of astronomy and medicine. The Indian numerals called Arabic in English but called hints by the Arabs found in the inscriptions of Ashoka. 2nd century discovery of zero Apasthamba's writings on practical geometry for the construction of altars, invention of steel making. 2nd century BC to Anno Domini 7th century, the Ajanta caves were built. Anno Domini 1st century, arrival of Christianity. 2nd century, Shushrata and Charka. 400, the composition of the Ayurveda. 5th century, epigraphic evidence for the use of the decimal. 476 to 540, date of Aryabhatta, who wrote Aryabhatiya. 6th century, Varahamihira and his famous work Brihad Samhita. 873, the earliest use of zero in Arabia. That's it. Ancient India was completed with this chapter. Thank you.